Hi, everybody. Good early evening this evening, Thursday, July 28, 2016. Thanks for joining us for this earlier webinar than usual. I hope for some of you it worked out well for you, and especially for those of you on the East Coast, you get to have a webinar before it's bedtime. So glad we could do it. Glad you could join us. I want to talk about this because oftentimes we think about this dynamic, these principles of self and intimacy. We think about them in terms of our partner relationships, our marital relationships. So a lot of the research, a lot of the theory, a lot of the writing about this is with regard to that. Intimacy isn't a word that we often think and associate with children, parent and children. But intimacy is that connection, right? It's that connection between two people, that openness between two people, that shared vulnerability between two people. It's all of those things. And so there is an application to children, to all family relationships. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The place that I will start, and the most simple thing that I will say, and I'll probably repeat this during many of the things and the stories that I'll be talking about tonight, is this. You can only be intimate to the extent that yourself is developed, wholly and individually. Right? So the more you have a developed sense of self, a whole sense of self, clarity about who you are, right? Clarity about your boundaries, a sense of what you feel and think. That gives you, that defines your capacity to have a relationship with another person. Some of you might know that when people get into recovery, for example, when people get into recovery for drugs and alcohol, that they ask them, that it's a common suggestion to ask them not to get into a relationship with another person for at least a year. And the reason that they do that is they're saying, you don't know who you are yet off of substances. And so let's get that defined. Let's go through your fourth step and your fifth step. Let's get that work done. And then once we do that, we've built the foundation for what an intimate relationship requires in that process. So this idea of developing the self in order to, as the first ingredient of intimacy is important. I'm going to talk about Erik Erikson's stages of development, and because I think this developmental model, and I think for parents it could be very comforting. It speaks to this idea in our children. A developmental model suggests that certain stages have to be accomplished before they can go on to other stages, and the success of those stages is necessary in order to go on. Another thing that's true about developmental models is that each stage is qualitatively different. So many of you talk about your children and say their chronological age is this, but their maturity age is this. And this is what you're talking about. You're saying, yeah, they've acquired more knowledge, yeah, they have more experience, intellectually they might be more advanced, but emotionally, a core level, their ability to interact with others in a mature way is still a much younger level, their frustration tolerance and so forth. So that's what this model is. This is the most generally accepted model when we think about general human development. Erikson built his stages off of Freud's stages and created more of them. And so he talks about these tasks during each stage. And if the task is accomplished, if the needs are met, the goals are met, then there's success. And if they're not met, then there develops this problem, this issue with each one. Of course, in infancy, it's about trust versus mistrust, which is, are my needs taken care of in a relatively quick way, right? If a baby doesn't get changed and doesn't get fed, doesn't get nurtured, help, and cared for with warmth and connection, then they learn to distrust the world. If they do, generally speaking, if there is good enough parenting, then they develop a sense of trust in the world, that the world is a safe place. In toddler, it's about autonomy, right? This is the terrible twos, when they start to say no, right? Can they be independent? Is that okay for mother and father for them to be independent? Or are mother and father frustrated and at their wits' end with the child's independence? Do they overfunction for them, right? Do they not allow the child to try things because they might fail? If that's accomplished, then they start to develop this healthy sense of autonomy. And there's 3 times in life when we develop this. But we start to develop this foundation for a healthy sense of autonomy. If we don't, then we have a more negative sense of ourselves. There's more shame, insecurity, unsure of themselves, right? Unsure to go out and explore the world, to try new things, to take risks. Preschool age is initiative versus guilt, right? This is the stage in life when children are venturing out of the home more and more each day, initiating their own activities with less and less adult and parental supervision, and learning to experiment with social relationships. So the initiation phase, right? And if they are allowed to do that and supported, and it doesn't cause mom and dad too much anxiety, then they develop a strong sense of locus of control, of self-efficacy. If they're not allowed to do that, or they struggle dramatically through that, then they develop a sense of guilt, especially guilt around mom and dad. Because if mom and dad are upset, anxious, and they respond to that, then they feel guilty for causing those kinds of feelings in their parents. Industry versus inferiority. This is that place where they're learning to develop and accomplish tasks, right? There's an incredible amount of development in elementary school in the brain. And they accomplish more tasks during that time. They improve on their tasks during that period of time, maybe more than any other time in their lives. And so they learn to build things, to produce things, to problem solve. And if they're successful at that, great. If they're not successful at that, then they develop a sense of inferiority. That's pretty self-explanatory. Then there's this second time in life when identity or autonomy is an area of focus. During adolescence, they start to separate from parents, identify more with peers, right? Get angry at mom and dad, fight with mom and dad, develop, on the extreme end, oppositional defiance. But this is the time for the struggle, for the separation. This is what I call the second birth. And it's the second time in somebody's life when they start to develop a sense of individualness. Like, who am I, right? We know this about adolescents. They experiment with their identity, what they believe in. They practice it. They start to identify with certain groups, certain peers. And part of this means that their peer group is going to have more influence on them than their parents, for better and for worse. And as far as the parents go, their capacity to tolerate this, to adjust to a new emotional proximity to their child is important. Some of us parents struggle. Some of us don't want them to grow up in a way. Some of us want them to continue to act like they did when they were school age or preschool age. And so it becomes our own struggle, right? So if they don't develop this sense of identity, if they don't master these tasks to some degree, then they have this role confusion of who am I in the world? What's my place in the world? And I want to make it clear, this place right now, this is the formation of the identity we talk about that is necessary in order to have intimate relationships, because the next phase is intimacy versus isolation. Young people go through all kinds of drama during adolescence in their relationships, right? Highs and lows, hate and love, many breakups, reactivity, jealousies, all those things. And if they can negotiate those, if they can work their way through those, then they start to develop a sense of a more intimate, satisfying, stable relationship. So do they have the foundation, the wherewithal, in terms of their identity, to have healthy relationships? The most common failure in this area looks like incompleted tasks in adolescence, where then an individual goes and rushes out and finds somebody very young, gets married or moves in, and finds this new other to attach themselves to in order to escape the trauma, the enmeshment, the fighting, the conflict at home, right? Many people do that. My parents did a version of this. They eloped. My mother picked somebody that her parents did not approve of, so forth and so on. And this is kind of a classic story, right? Going out and finding somebody else. But the problem with that is if there's not a sufficient level of identity that's independent, that doesn't need that other person to escape to in order to find separation from parents, then they're just replacing one for the other. And then the relationship is going to struggle significantly because at some point, these individuals are going to have to negotiate, who am I, what do I want? Where are we connected and where are we separate? Another thing I'll say, going back to adolescence, because I forgot to say this, is that another perversion of the identity development is that the adolescent rejects, of course, everything that the parents believe in, right? If there's one thing I know I am not, says the adolescent, it is you. I used to joke about this. I just got back from a trip from Canada, and so there's some fresh thoughts about Canadians as I got back last night. But my friend who's Canadian used to tell me that one of the ways that Canadians identified themselves growing up was, we're not American, right? That's one of the first things that they say when they talk about what is Canada. What does it mean to be Canadian? And for adolescents, that often can look like, one thing I am not is I'm not my parents. I'm not my father, I'm not my mother. You know, that's why children who have parents that are teachers fail out of school. Children that have parents that are lawyers or in the legal system get arrested. Right? They're perfectly defining themselves in what we would call a negative identity, which is what I am not. So going back to young adulthood, if we build the foundation, then we have a greater chance at success in the next phase. And this is where I want to pause and bring it back to you and your children. The distance that wilderness therapy specifically creates. Doesn't matter if your child is 13 or 25. But the distance that wilderness therapy creates by its structure, starting off, of course, with no contact over the phone, no contact in person, letter writing, gradually increasing to include phone calls in many cases, some visits in some cases, and then an end of program visit. These are all a way for us to pull everybody apart, start to work on who you are as individuals, and then practice coming back together. That's why letter writing is so powerful. I used to say that one of the best things about wilderness therapy in the old days, when they weren't posted online, maybe they were faxed, but often these letters were sent through snail mail, is that people had to write a letter and wait 4 or 5 days for its response. Oftentimes, parents had to write letters back to their children before they got the letters from their children. That was really hard back in the day. But what it did that was wonderful is you stopped writing the letter to try to control what the other person said or thought or believed or felt. You started to have to write from a place that is your truth. So it was less of a ping-pong back and forth kind of thing, which of course is the epitome of a lack of intimacy, a lack of healthy connection. But the more clear you can get about yourself, and I think a lot of you can attest to this, the more able you are to define yourself and to know your boundaries and know what you want and feel and believe and think, the more capable you are of holding the other person in your mind, listening to the other person, not reacting to the other person when they're attacking you, not also getting intoxicated when they think you're the greatest person in the world, because those things are not about you and you're clear about that. So we try to create distance, which is a metaphor for the emotional distance that's necessary in order to develop a whole self. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but when I was talking about this years ago, and I've told the story many times, a parent asked me when I was teaching this, when are you going to talk about connection? And I responded by essentially saying, I am talking about connection. Differentiation, identity development, separation is the first ingredient in connection. Without those things, without that fusion, and I'll talk about that later, it's not really intimacy, it's abandonment. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Later on, middle adulthood, generativity versus stagnation. You know, what are we creating at work? Are we having children? What are we giving back to the world? What are we nurturing? Versus feeling stuck and empty. And then, of course, the last time in life is this kind of third time when our identity is questioned. As we grow into maturity, we reflect back on, who am I? What has my life been? Sometimes the midlife crisis is that third phase where we question everything. You know, we quit becoming we quit working as a stockbroker and we become a ceramics teacher, right? We move out of the big mansion and buy a little beach shack or something like that. These are these times in our lives when we, again, ask ourselves, who am I? What rules have I been living by? Whose rules have I been living by? And it's interesting to me because when the child is going through adolescence to find themselves, it's often the same time period in life where the mature adult is going through their questioning of self, right? Parents in their mid-40s, somewhere around there, oftentimes have children in the 13 to 20-year-old range. So I always thought it was this poetic kind of synergy that parents and children were going through essentially the same stage in their development at generally the same times. Murray Bowen and Salvador Minuchin are two of the founders of family therapy. There's a half a dozen that around the same time were creating family therapy, right? Moving away from the individual model and treating people in couples and in large groups. Bowen actually didn't treat anybody more than one person at a time, but he thought about the family in terms of the system. He had interventions that were family interventions, even though he only saw one person at a time. So that's where these men came from. Minuchin had this model. He defined boundaries in these three ways, and I've written them up there. He said enmeshment, and he illustrated enmeshment by these dots, this dotted line. Enmeshment is that overconnection, that fusion, that reactivity, that dependence, that what you feel, I feel. What you feel about me, I think about me. That kind of overconnectedness. And then disengagement on the other side. I'll go back to the middle in a moment. Disengagement is too far apart, right? Uncaring, unempathic, right? Abandoning, those types of things. And he often said that sometimes people vacillate between these two poles, but I'll talk about Bowen in a minute, how he kind of brought these things together. And then he said, what Minuchin said, the middle ground was clarity, right? The dashed line. He said, a boundary where things get through, but there's still a boundary. And so this isn't close. And obviously this isn't close. This is close. Two people moving independently, touching, but really living in their own orbit, if you will. That's what Salvador Minuchin said. Murray Bowen came along and said, I think that we can define this a different way. And he said, on the one end, he talked about the one end is this stylistic thing called fusion, which is like Minuchin's version of enmeshment, right? Too close. This is fusion. He said then cutoff, which is Minuchin's version of disengagement, is not qualitatively different. It's stylistically different. Fusion and cutoff are the opposite of intimacy. And so he had this continuum, and it has an arrow at the end and he kind of diagrammed it 0 to 100 because he thought nobody really gets to 100. Nobody's perfect in this way. And this was a powerful idea because most of us look at the surface. We move away from our family when we're 18 years old and we move across the country to get away from them. We haven't solved anything, right? We've cut off from them, but we haven't solved anything. Divorce doesn't solve anything. Divorce can be evidence of a solution, but it doesn't solve anything. Because the thing that we take with us is the individuation and the capacity for intimacy, no matter where we go. That's why I always say to couples that I've worked with, the work that you have to do won't change whether you get divorced or stay married. It's the same work. And if you don't change that internally, it doesn't matter what external changes you make, it doesn't make a difference. That's why placement out of home doesn't solve it. Everybody has to do their parallel process, their work. And then even if you're far apart, you can feel close because it's honest. It's vulnerable. It's the relationship, the communication, all that has integrity, right? And so you can be close to somebody who lives all the way across the country because of the way you're communicating, how you're reacting or not reacting to each other. So I really like Bowen's example. And he defined the other end of the fusion and cutoff continuum as differentiation. Differentiation is much like intimacy. The level of connectedness and separation. Right? Am I a complete and distinct individual? And do I then connect to you and hear you? And really, they're almost synonymous. right? That's why I always say on these webinars, don't I, that if you are a more whole self, you're going to listen to other people and you're going to hear them. If you're not a whole self, you're going to hear other people as if they're talking about you. So when they're mad at you or frustrated with you or in love with you, you're going to think that has something to do with you. And it doesn't necessarily. Right? That's what Don Miguel Ruiz says in the Four Agreements. It's not about you. So we carry around this level of differentiation in us, in our lives. And here's the thing that Bowen also taught that was really cool. He said families have, he'd give a family a general number. Like, let's say this family operates at like a 75. Everybody in the family operates somewhere between a 73 and a 78 in this family, 75 being the average. What happens is when you leave home and you go out and find somebody, you find somebody that's around a 75. See, 75s don't like to hang around 90s, and 90s don't like to hang around 75s. 75s don't like to hang around 60s, and 60s don't like 75s. It doesn't work. Right? If I don't call you, and your reaction is to escalate because you're wondering if I still love you, and you call me back, if I'm a 90 and you do that, I'm thinking, wow, what's going on here? Like I'm at work today or whatever it is, right? That's a 90. Whereas if you're 60 and you're jealous and reactive and fight and all the emotions just go hot off of each other and go hot and cold, all of that stuff, 60s and 90s don't work out together. So you find people in your life around the same number, and that's what works. Right? And that's where I think people, when they go out and find somebody, maybe even after divorce or when they leave home, they have this fantasy that the person is fundamentally different. And in this way, Bowen suggests that they're not. And he's right. Because I don't like to be around people that are, it's hard for me to be around people that are 10 spots above me. I don't get them. I don't think that they care. And it's really uncomfortable and unpleasant to be around people that are 10 spots below me because all of the drama, all of the lack of security and the lack of okayness with themselves, and I don't want to take care of it. So I like people around my number, whatever that number is, no matter who you are. There's this idea of interpersonal versus intrapsychic differentiation that I think is a cool principle. See, interpersonal differentiation is the relationship between two people, right? Where I stop and you start. When you get mad, can I hear that? How do I react to that? So forth and so on. Intrapsychic differentiation is, do I have the ability to see the difference between my thoughts and my feelings? My beliefs and my thoughts, right? All those parts, my wants, my hopes, my likes, my dislikes. That's intrapsychic differentiation. I can see the parts of myself. When I have that capacity, I have what Siegel and Hartzell call response flexibility. When I have that capacity, I don't react to other people, right? The I feel statement makes sense to me. Listening is easier. Right, all of those things. So intrapsychic is the internal ability. I have more choice. I'm more conscious. I can make choices flexibly instead of reactively. That's intrapsychic differentiation. Interpersonal is how it shows up in my relationship between other people. There's this idea that Bowen talks about, the low self. That's depending upon others for acceptance and approval for their sense of self, right? We do that with our children sometimes. We do that with our partner, spouse. We do that with strangers sometimes. That's the low self. You know, the other things that I have down below are examples of stylistic differences. You know, the bully versus the chameleon. They're just complementary roles, right? They're just at a core level an inability to be in relationship to other people in an authentic way. That's what they are. So in that disagreement versus rebellion, or in rebellion, is that idea that that's how some people solve their identity issue, by developing a negative identity. In high differentiated relationships, the high differentiated individuals, there's conflict and problem resolution. There's all those things, communication, without escalating, without abandoning, without threatening, without coercing, all those kinds of things. And then really what we're talking about tonight is healthy detachment. Right? In codependency, they talk about healthy detachment all the time. And in parenting, it's a process for us, right? We start off with infants and we're absolutely connected. They depend on us for life. And then throughout the lifespan, we get, and appropriately so, farther and farther away from our children, giving them more and more space, more and more autonomy. We become less essential to their lives. Parents that say, I want my 17-year-old to be the way he was when he was 12, that's inappropriate. We want something different. There might be some aspects of it that you miss, but it's not appropriate for a 17 to go back to the way he was. So that's why when parents say, I got my child back, what they mean, what I hope that they mean is they have their child in their lives. And it's a new child. It's a better child. It's not the old version. And that takes our own development. I've talked about this, and it's in my book, and it's clear. Over-identification is abandonment. Right? Healthy detachment is healthy connection. I was even talking with some of my clinicians last week about healthy detachment. They were talking about not liking the word detachment. It was actually some of the field staff. And I said, but see, in the literature, detachment isn't not caring. In the literature, detachment isn't distance in the way that you're thinking about. Detachment means I can see you. Detachment is intimacy. Right? If somebody tries to talk me out of my feelings, they're not connected to me. They're trying to control me to manage their own anxiety. If I have a friend who experiences some sorrow and I'm uncomfortable with it and I try to make him happy, that's not intimacy. That's me needing him to be a certain way so I feel okay. Detachment means that I can sit with him, that I can hold space for him. So over-identification or over-empathy, these are kind of illusions of closeness. When parents over-empathize with their children, right? When what their children feels is what the parent feels, you can't remain objective. You can't remain in the parental position. You can't have boundaries, right? So sometimes I hear it get used in therapy, and even I've used it in therapy. Even I might use it in the future in therapy. But what I'm challenging you all with tonight is over-empathizing, over-identification. It is not too much closeness. It is a lack of sense of self and respect, acknowledgement of the other self. Clear as can be. It is a wound. And it's creating a wound. I talk about this idea of listening at the expense of boundaries because when we teach listening skills, I think some people think that we say listen and that's all you do. And that's not all you do. That's one thing that you do. But if your listening asks you to sacrifice your boundaries and what's okay for you, meaning that if I listen to your pain, you're my child, and I listen to your pain, that I don't have to give you what you want. When your child writes home and says, I want to come home, or your young adult says, you know, I hate you, I can't believe you won't let me come live at home. You can listen and validate and understand and see, you know, see the world from their shoes, but you don't have to give them what they want. Daniel Siegel makes that point in Parenting from the Inside Out. When parents think that they have to meet all of their children's wants and requests, right, then they're really not taking care of them. Oftentimes, talking too much is trying to talk other people into things. You know, I see parents that are incredibly intelligent lecture, debate, and try to reason. Because they try to do that because they want the other person to be convinced and be on the same page. I was working with a couple of parents recently who were kind of doing some couples work. And we talked about this where they're learning to say to each other, I know you want me to feel what you're feeling right now. I don't feel that way. And I would like you to stop. And they say it playfully and lovingly. But sometimes we do that because we don't want to set a boundary and then deal with standing alone. This understanding crazy principle, I talk about this in the book. You don't have to, being an alcoholic is an irrational place, right? Being a child is an irrational place. Part of the idea of child development is they move from irrational to rational. And so parents, there's a couple of ways I want to talk about this, because parents sometimes, they try to understand crazy. You can't understand thinking errors. You can't understand irrational stuff except for to understand that it's irrational. And so It's not the way you think. It's not rational. It's not intentional. It's not logical. And that's okay. And if you try to reason with a drunk, as I always say, try to reason with drunk people, with crazy people, with people that have mental health issues, it's going to go nowhere. It's just going to waste everybody's time. Another thing that I would say juxtaposed to that is that in some way, even in the rational sense, everything makes sense. The child that is practicing self-defeating behaviors is doing it for a reason. So part of what I say to parents is when you say you don't understand your child, it's because you don't have the capacity to see. When a child is cutting on herself, in one way that makes sense. When a person is drinking himself or herself today, in one crazy way that makes sense. And the more capacity we develop, the more we get in touch with our own darkness, our own limitations, right? Our own addictions, the more able we are to see the sense in the crazy, if you will. Democracy is in hierarchy. A lot of parents make the mistake of thinking that parenting is democratic. It's not. Life is not democratic in that way. Marriage is not democratic. If you are abusing me and you're my partner, that's not for negotiation. Right? If parents always ask us, should I ask my son or daughter what she thinks or feels or wants? I say, all the time. And let that inform you, but it doesn't count as an equal vote in your life, in your boundary. But I think because of the wound that the parent has, that they enlist the child in a hierarchical position that's equal to a parent because they don't feel okay enough about themselves. I'm not talking about an autocratic, dictatorial style. I'm talking about a compassionate style, but a style that's independent. Part of what we're doing with all family members, children to parents, is looking at your family of origin wounds. Right? Alice Miller said, we have only one enduring weapon in our fight against mental illness, and that is the discovery of our unique childhood. Right? Sorting out the rules, the roles, the messages, the metacommunication, the lack of development. I was talking about this in the parent meeting just this weekend in Canada. And I'm going to tell the story, so if there's anybody here from Canada, this could be the second or third time you've heard this story. In Star Wars, the first Star Wars, Episode 4, the one that came out in 1979, in Star Wars, there was that scene where Obi-Wan Kenobi was training Luke Skywalker for the first time with the lightsaber, and he had that little flying electrical ball that shocks to him, electric shocks to Luke Skywalker. So Luke was practicing, and then Obi-Wan gave him this helmet to wear, and the helmet had a shield in front of his eyes that he couldn't see. And George Lucas used this metaphor to suggest this to the audience. This is why these things resonate with all of us so deeply. And George Lucas absolutely knew the unconscious message that he was sending because he'd read Joseph Campbell's book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, and he understood it. He understood the transformation. It is saying to us, you've got to see the world differently. You've got to see the world qualitatively different. The eyes that you've been using to look at human beings and life have to evolve. And so that's this idea of breaking out of our own childhood, right? Challenging. It doesn't mean that we have to hate our parents, although sometimes we go through that stage. But it means that the constructions of our childhood, the rules, the lessons, the ideas, the paradigms of our childhood weren't the truth. They were just somebody's truth. And they become observable constructions, right? So we have to get out of it. We have to break free of it. We have to be able to break free of it to see it often. You are not your child. So many parents are trying to repair their own wounds in their children. They're trying to get their children what they didn't have. That's dangerous because I've seen it hundreds, if not thousands of times where when we peel back a few layers, we get clear that that's not what your child needed right then. That's what you needed that you did not get as a child. And so it's important that we work on and heal our own childhood wounds so we can see our children. Again, it comes back to seeing them. Objectification and seeing your child's needs. Objectification is I turn you into a thing. right? And the way that I do this in parenting is this. If you succeed, then it's evidence of me. Your successes aren't yours. They are evidence of my goodness as a father. Your failures are evidence of my badness. You liking me or loving me are mirror. It's a mirror. I lose contact with you because you become a mirror to me to tell me about me. I'll say that again. I lose contact with you because you become a mirror that I look at. You become something that I look at to tell me about me. And we all struggle with this. All of us. Right? When a child throws a tantrum in a grocery store and we have shame, we think people are judging us. We're doing it. When we talk about or worry about where our children are when they're at Evoke, and we worry about what friends will think, we're doing it. When we're proud of our children for going to college and we love telling people about it, we're doing it. Right? Like I told many of you before, the story when Bob Dylan, the famous singer, when his son had a #1 album, and some reporter asked Bob, how proud of you are you of your son Jacob and all of his success? Bob Dylan said, "It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter to me." And what Bob was aware of, what Bob knew is, it's not his life. If I had a student, I was telling a student this one time, a long time ago, and he said, "You can't tell me that if your daughter got into Harvard, that you wouldn't be proud of her." And I said, ideally, in my best days, it wouldn't matter to me if she got into Harvard. If she worked hard for something and accomplished something she really wanted, I'd be happy for her. But being proud of her, or the story I tell when somebody congratulated me on the art college my son got a scholarship to. They congratulated me. I thought to myself, what did I do? Right? So when we objectify our children, we turn them into reflections of us. We have to learn to grow up. We have to learn to take care of ourselves and realize it's not our child's, nor is it our spouse's job to take care of us. When we can grow up and learn to take care of ourselves, then the gifts that we give are gifts of love. Right? We can from that place, that's the only place that we can really give love. There is the risk. This is what the drama of the gifted child talks about in Alice Miller's book. The risk is that our children are psychically engineered to be willing to give up themselves in order to take care of us. So we have to learn to have them not take care of us. To need them to think we're great parents, wonderful parents, right? That's not their job. To need them to be successful so we can feel okay, that's not their job. And I've said this to some of you in person. Your children are actually pretty horrible at times of taking care of you. So take care of yourself. Develop a full life. And then when you love your child, it will be love. It won't be need. It won't be a request for reciprocity. It'll be love. In order to grow up, we have to learn to feel guilt and do it anyway. Right? That's part of therapy. Your guilt's not going to go away, folks. It doesn't go away in me. It can dissipate over time. But in order to grow up, it's important to learn and be willing to feel guilt and do the right thing. And it's your choice when you're ready to do it. Nobody can get you to do it or make you do it. So what's the take home? Do your work. I was at the parent meeting. I was so happy the other night at the parent meeting. We had about 40, 45 people in the first meeting that I did. And when we did introductions, I asked them to share some wisdom, if they had some. And 10 people at least said, do your work. And then we talked about what that meant. But do your work. Go to meetings. Go to therapy. Go to 6 12-step meetings. Feel the pain and do it anyway. Honor the pain, embrace it, lean into it, but do it anyway. Read good books. Be patient with yourself. You're not going to get this perfect. The idea of learning to kill your parents is this. A Buddhist teacher said to me one time, in order to grow up, you have to kill your parents. My therapist responded to that person by saying, I think you have to kill everybody. But in other words, you have to let go of them. Try to make them proud. That's a futile attempt, and it's not your job. So we learn to kill our parents. We learn to kill the idea of our childhood, that it was the only truth that there was. And then we can take from it what we want. But it's intentional and not automatic. Let them grow up. Stop keeping them small. Learn to find your people, people that know this stuff, people that have been through this. Learn to find your people. And they're few and far between. A lot of people, because they haven't had to go through what you've all gone through, they don't know this stuff, and you know what I'm talking about. You've had discussions with people after you've been in this for a while, and you've realized that they don't get it. So find your people, and then lean into it. Embrace it. I put this on here because it used to be on every webinar. This was an old webinar. And I did this every time for the first 2 years, where I would have a slide that said not cause and effect. And what that was is, it's not simple cause and effect, right? These are the principles of healthy parenting, and they provide the most optimal context for your child. And to beat yourself up for them because you did it wrong, and you all did it wrong sometimes, go ahead and do that as long as you want. But then you can get back to the business of making this your project to work on. And it's not a simple cause and effect. Your children, we have to grow up in spite of our parents. We have our work to do. That's our responsibility. So you can be accountable for you, and they can still be accountable for them. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think that's the mistake we make sometimes. All right, I'm happy to take any live questions before we go over announcements. If you were raised at 75, are you always at 75? Or is it, yes. Good point. Is it possible to change? And if you change from a 75 to a 90 and your partner's still 75, how does that work? Not very well. That can lead to a divorce. You know, if you're both going forward, but some people stay at a 30 and they don't grow. And some people are inclined and able to change and to grow, right? To put on the mask that Obi-Wan is talking about, and to learn to see the world through new eyes. And sometimes both partners aren't well suited. So probably technically speaking, I don't know that Bowen says this, but 75s are often likely to change. It's more that when we start off as 50s, right, or 40s, sometimes people that are 20s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, they don't ever want to change. And if one partner gets inspired and wants to change, then yeah, you can move through reading good books, through therapy, through Al-Anon, through all these things, through all the stuff we talk about, through your work. You can change. Absolutely. How do you find your people? Some are at Al-Anon, but you're right about people not going through what we have gone through. You learn to practice telling your story at Al-Anon and other places. You learn, it takes a long time. They're not in droves out there. So you learn from Al-Anon, you learn to tell your story to people, and then you see how they respond. Right? You can find them at work. A lot of people tell me the story that they started to tell friends and associates. I found myself more than once in my life telling my truth and losing friends as a result of that. Not losing them like they just left me, but we just didn't fit anymore. And finding new friends or emboldening friendships that I had that I didn't think were as meaningful. And all of a sudden, now that I'm in this different place, we match up together much, much better. And so, in another thing from Joseph Campbell, in the stories that we read, the stories that we watch in movies and film, the stories are often have a death motif, and this is what he talks about, because he talks about, the death motif is the new version of ourselves, and you guys are developing a new version of yourselves through this process, and maybe more than one, and some of you are farther along than others, and when you have a new version of yourself, and you start to share that with other people, you'll find other people that also are in that place. And if they're continuing to grow and you grow, then you stay with them. And if you move faster or they move faster, you'll drift apart. All right, the play is coming in New York. It's starting in New York. It'll tour the country in 2017. But this October 26th, there's an opening night gala that you can sign up for that we're not hosting, but we're going to be there. And the morning of October 27th, we're going to have a breakfast with the Vogue. We're going to have, I believe, all the Second Nature partners, a few of the therapists, some of the program people are going to be there, and all of their spouses and partners too. So we'll invite you to a breakfast. We'll send out an invite soon. You can go to onguardarts.org And there you can look at the trailer for the play and also follow it for upcoming dates. You can look at them and find them on Facebook from there. Here's our upcoming workshops. The Entrada and Cascades workshops, that's the 3-day experiential, large group, psychoeducational. Then the Heroic Journeys one is closed in August. And we have the next one that's open is Finding You. That's for any individual. So young adult to older adult. It's a deep workshop, 6 individuals max at the Finding You, and that will be doing your own work, looking at your own family of origin. If you want to go deeper, sign up for that. It's equivalent to the one that I talked about in the first chapter of my book that I went to. Heroic Journeys is the one for families. There's an opening in October. We're going to do that one out in the field at the Oasis. So if you want to take your family out to the field and do a 4-day intensive out there with your family, do that there. These are the 12-step support groups we want you all to attend 6 of while your children are with us. If you haven't started, start now. If you're already graduated and you haven't done it, please do go. Upcoming parent support groups. If you're in Chicago, you have an upcoming parent support group that will start in a half an hour or so. So hurry up and go over there. That's tonight. Los Angeles. That's that new format. That's a Sunday, so we can help avoid traffic. We're going to have a potluck at 4 to 5 p.m. and then a parent support group 5 to 7 p.m. So we've done it on Sunday to get rid of traffic. We've added the potluck portion, so there's some social time. And plus, if you promise to bring food, you have to come. All right, social media. There's our social media. There's the Pursuits trip. Those are high adventure. You can customize a family one. You can go in a group. Your young adults can go themselves. Think of it as therapy light, sober fun. The book is available in paperback, audio. Go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page to buy books, and 10% of your purchase goes to charity. All right, the next webinar will be Monday. This is coming up Monday, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, back to the regular time. And we're going to talk about Walkabout and a couple of other interventions. But we're going to talk about Walkabout, which is an intervention that we do sometimes as a reward, sometimes as a heightened level of therapy for people. Some of you may have had your children go through it, and some of them still may go through it. But we'll be talking about that Monday, August 1st at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. All right, I have time. Michael says a few more questions come in, so I can take a few questions. If your child went through treatment and yet still has the negative views of themselves, and the treatment perpetuated that sense of clinging too much to their past behaviors that they define themselves by it, is there any way for me as a mother to help her find her inner beauty and drop the negative peers and feelings and behaviors? She's almost 21 and I'm worried for her future, but I'm letting her live her own life while living mine, but wondering if I should do more. I mean, the broken record in me says make sure you're doing your work all along the way and don't try to fix her. And then you'll figure out how to be supportive and connected with her in the process. So I think that's what I would say. Instead of trying to get her to feel something different, spend a lot of time trying to figure out and make sense of what she does feel. I empathize with that. There's a great little you can Google Brene Brown empathy cartoon. I think you'll probably find it that way. But it shows the difference between sympathy and empathy and other things. And what it shows is the person getting down in the hole with the person who is stuck and sitting with them. I remember one time I was doing a parent support group in New York where a mother talked about her daughter. It's like she's so depressed, like she's living under a bus. And I said, after a long time, instead of trying to talk her out from under the bus, get under the bus with her. Sit with her, feel it. Understand the darkness, understand the negativity. Understand that in some crazy way it makes sense. And when you can empathize and resonate with them at that level, then they feel safe and they can often heal. And it's not a guarantee and you can't control it. From your experience with Evoke parents, how much parental change improvement, a percentage of points, can the participants expect to see typically? Or a better question, do you equip the participants to understand and deal with the possibility that there will be very little parental change? We prepare them to expect no change of you. And in some ways, I prepare you to expect no change in them. That's the best approach. I would assume, I think the best way to approach this is assume nobody in your family is going to change. And then what are you going to do? To take care of yourself, to be healthy in relationship. That's what I would say. That's what I would encourage. Of course, we acknowledge some of the change. We see some of the change. They see some of the change. But if we all count on that too much, and we don't prepare ourselves, in the book, The Dance of Anger, which is the greatest book on boundaries I've ever read, she talks about the change back message that we get from people in our family when we change. That if we prepare ourselves for the change back energy message, homeostatic energy is what they call it in family systems theory, where a system tends to want to maintain the status quo, and even when there's positive change, there's energy in the system to bring it back. People don't applaud your boundaries. They don't even recognize them, right? So that's what I would say. Telling them they're proud of them, I don't like to use the word proud of. I don't use the phrase proud. This is just my own thing. I say I'm happy for you, or my gosh, I think you can be proud of yourself, or that's awesome, that's impressive. But for me, just for me, being proud of you makes it about me. I don't want you to work to be proud of me, for me to be proud of you. Right? I don't want any child to try to make their parents proud. So that's my own little quirk. I just don't think it's very important. Oh wait, that was not the old question, that was the new question. My son is working really hard at Evoke. We visited him recently and saw him feel and express his emotions like never before. I want to tell him that we see his progress. Does telling him we're proud of him mean that it is a reflection of me, or is it that we really realize that he's making progress? I would just say I noticed you made progress. That was impressive. That was fantastic. Incredible job. I'm happy for you. Same thing I just said, only I read the whole question now. So that's my opinion. I like it. I don't know that I see this written in other places, a lot of places, but when I am with people that are higher on the differentiation scale and that are more evolved, they don't tell people as often that they're proud of them. That's just my experience. Just my thought. All right, folks. Thank you for all your questions, for your attendance at this new, unusual time. Remember, Monday, August 1st at 7 p.m. is the new one. Have a great weekend, safe weekend, and I'll talk to you on Monday. Bye-bye.